AFMC is really known.
And also make sure
Welcome to AFMC TV. I'm Robin Ledbetter. Thank you so much for joining us. Today I have with me Mr. Jim Myers, and Jim is the Business Development Manager for the American Heart Association of CPR in the Southwest United States. Jim, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Robin. Thanks.
So what is the AHA doing to focus on cardiac care?
It's probably easier to say what we're not doing that focuses on cardiac care, because that's obviously what we're known for. We're now about to embark in our 99th year, too. So we've been around for a long time with cardiac care. But cardiac care has expanded because we all have hearts. We all know the health equity issue in the United States is tough, especially in rural areas. So we're really focusing a lot on that. In fact, I just came back from a rural summit last week in Dallas talking about that, is just how can we up the level of care and access to our rural friends, and there's 7 million of them in the Southwest U.S. How can we make that a better experience for them and save more lives? So that's probably one thing, the inequity of just access to health we're really trying to work on.
And you have a personal connection as well?
I do have a personal story. And a matter of fact, when I was 38, I was cutting Christmas trees in northern New Mexico by myself for my recently widowed mom and my family, and just started having a shortness of breath and didn't know what it was. I'd not known anything about heart issues before. So I was dragging those trees up to my Isuzu Trooper, tied one on top, put one in the back, and still short of breath, almost like I'd run a race and I just couldn't catch my breath. So I just thought, well, nobody's going to find me way out here in the wilderness. I better drive out of here. And I had to make a decision when I finally got to the highway 5 miles later, which way toward Albuquerque, the big town I live in, or Cuba, New Mexico, a really small little bump in the road there. I decided to go to Cuba and see if I needed something to eat, low on blood sugar or whatever, and saw a clinic that was part-time open, I've learned since, and walked in there and started signing up, as they do. The person didn't look up, and she finally looked up and said, "Do you need immediate help?" And I said, "Yes." And so they took me back, and all they had really was aspirin and oxygen at this little clinic. So they gave me that and called for a helicopter, and 3.5 hours later, I was in Albuquerque. So it was a good example of how important rural access and access to meds and so forth are important in the rural space, because we've got a lot of people that need help and they need it fast. And because of the delay for me, I actually lost part of my heart. Heart muscle is the only one that can't regenerate.
So you'd mentioned about rural areas, and Arkansas is a rural state. So how does cardiac care affect rural areas, like specifically Arkansas?
Well, much like the other states, Arkansas is kind of in there at about 75% rural in terms of the counties. So it affects it a lot. You have a few main centers where cardiac care can be had, but unfortunately it can be hours away for folks. So things like telemedicine have really helped out a whole lot, and American Heart is on the forefront of that too. We've really worked on TCPR, it's called, so telecommunicator CPR. So when you do call 911, if you have an incident, a sudden cardiac arrest that's out of the hospital, you can call, and oftentimes you'll have someone who's trained to do CPR on the other end of the phone as a dispatcher. Now, that's not across the entire U.S. or all of Arkansas necessarily, but it's really something that we're passionate about and lobbying for in terms of the state houses that we're dealing with. We really think that's a great way of imparting information when it's obviously needed and critical.
Why is hands-only CPR training important? You mentioned on the dispatcher side, but that goes way beyond just working in dispatch.
Yeah. Well, in 2000, 2007, I believe, the Heart Association, kind of in a consortium with American Red Cross, got together and basically asked the question, how can we make this more accessible to more people? Because CPR and breaths, you've got to remember, all right, how many times do I push? When do I breathe? How do I breathe? I don't even know this person. Why should I breathe into their mouth? Things like that. And the pandemic obviously exacerbated that whole issue. So, but further back, 15 years ago or so, 16, we came up with that as a process and scientifically looked at it and had studies and found that people actually come out of the hospital alive even slightly more when they have hands-only CPR because you're starting it quicker. You don't have to think about it. You just, if someone is unresponsive and they're not breathing, you jump into action. And because of that, we've saved a lot of people that shouldn't be alive today, but we didn't hesitate to act.
And anyone can be trained in hands-only CPR as well, right? Not just healthcare professionals?
Yeah. And in fact, we came out with a statement today, the American Heart Association in circulation, that says even kids as young as 4 can be taught the basics of CPR, just where to put the hands and how hard to push and fast. They may not have the weight yet. We generally say 9 or 10, they can probably start actually performing CPR, but they certainly are native users to cell phones and know how to call 911, right? So those two aspects, calling 911 and pushing hard and fast in the center of the chest, we can start that training even as young as 4. And we found that children learners can really do it well and pass it on to others as they're growing through the grade school area too.
It starts so young and saves so many lives, especially in terms of kids having cardiac issues, as you mentioned.
Yep.
That's so important. So what is an AED? We hear about those a lot too.
It's an automated external defibrillator. That's just a fancy way of saying, have you ever seen those pump jacks that get oil out? You're an external pump. That's really all you're doing with your hands. And you're pushing on the heart hard and fast in a rhythm that's really 100 to 120 beats per minute. So we all know the classic Staying Alive, 46 years old at this point. So we have a whole new playlist if you're interested in new songs. But that's the premise. It's really a simple process. And we're just trying to demystify it as we look into how can we become a nation of lifesavers rather than a nation of bystanders.
And why is it so hard to train lay responders to use an AED?
Yeah, going back to the AED, I'm sorry. We're scared of it. I think we're scared that this is a machine that shocks people. We're going to get electrocuted. We don't know how to use it. It's a piece of scientific equipment. When the bottom line is, and in fact, I've got a little trainer right next to me here. It's just a little box that you turn on and it automatically prompts you to do the next thing. So it'll say, place the pads, assessing. It'll actually audio prompt you, and some even have a video screen of what it's doing and prompt you what's the next thing and what to expect. And ultimately, it'll say, all right, take your hands off and clear the patient so we can do an accurate assessment of their heartbeat, not yours. And then it'll provide a shock if there's a shockable rhythm available.
And how accessible are those to businesses, schools, athletic programs? Are they easy to get?
Not enough, Robin, not enough. You'd be surprised how many businesses do have them. But when you go into a Lowe's or a Home Depot, do you know where the AED is? Does anybody on staff know, or does everybody know where that AED is? So a problem of location is always something that we work with. There is a company called Pulse Point that actually you can register your AED if you're in a business with, for instance, and they will know where all the AEDs are in a certain area. And that's kind of a nice thing, but it's not certainly pan the United States. There's also a new company called Avive out of the San Francisco area that's creating kind of cool, small little like 2-pound AEDs that are interconnected by Bluetooth and kind of like an Amber Alert. If someone goes down in your area, your AED rings. They're designed for home use. good for the rural space that way. And they've just been FDA approved, and it'll alert all the AEDs in that area. So if you've got a neighbor 2 doors down, you just jump with your AED and go down and attempt to help them recover.
For sure. So tell me about the American Heart Association's birthday. You mentioned that you've got a big one coming up.
Yeah, 100 years. And we'll start celebrating, I think, July, because, it's 100 years. It's a big birthday. So there will be all sorts of information and probably more in the media about heart and heart health. And as you asked the first question, we are about different things like nutrition and trying to defy all the nutrition deserts that we have. And even things like electricity. Where I live, we have a lot of pueblos and reservations, and many of them have no running water or electricity. So access to fresh fruits and vegetables is really difficult for them. So it's a big job that we all need to be working on together. It's not just the Heart Association. A lot of folks are working on, solving those kind of issues in the U.S. and our rural spaces especially. But we're making really neat progress. And so I'm excited to say that going into our second 100 years, maybe we can stop, the prevalence of heart being the number one killer in the U.S. of women and men.
How important is access to healthcare needed, especially in rural communities? Yeah,
absolutely vital. We know that in rural communities, people take care of each other in many ways. There is community within those communities. They know each other. They know their neighbors, as opposed to a lot of suburban and urban areas where you go in the garage door and you close it and you don't really know your neighbors. So the good thing is they want to take care of each other. They just have to have the tools in order to make that happen. So as in my personal story in Cuba, New Mexico, they didn't have TCP, a drug that really kind of helps in a cardiac situation. So I had to fly, and without it, the heart was damaged. So there can be irreparable damage to someone who doesn't have access to the right meds quickly, as we call it, door to door. They're getting the necessary meds they need to bust clots or whatever. It's a stroke situation. Time is absolutely essential in those situations. So things like ambulances having to go over bumpy roads, in rural areas, it just slows things down. So the faster we can get meds to them, if we can get drones, working in the future to get meds to clinics in the outskirts. There actually is I can't remember if it was Zimbabwe or in Africa, Uganda. There are drones actually delivering blood to area hospitals within 20 minutes, where it took 4 hours to drive it before. So it's not pie in the sky. It's actually happening. It's just we haven't really gotten it down to the infrastructure we need in the U.S. to make it happen.
Wow. That sounds amazing. Delivering blood by drone, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a proud volunteer for the American Heart Association, but clinicians are also needed as volunteers too. Tell me why.
If I could just reach out and grab every nurse and doctor out there and say, look, we have so many opportunities for you to do simple things like teaching hands-only CPR to students across all of Arkansas and in different businesses. We have businesses reaching out to us, and frankly, we just don't have the bandwidth to be able to have our people go out to multiple businesses or organizations and nonprofits and demonstrate hands-only CPR. But we do have a volunteer network. In fact, the head of it for the Southwest is in Arkansas. And we've organized it such that if we know when an event is, he can find appropriate volunteers to actually be able to facilitate the trainings out in the field. We just frankly only have 60 people, 60 in the Southwest. That's all we have for the entire 6 states that I'm over. So you can imagine we'd love to have clinicians just kind of knock on the door and say, well, hey, what can I do? How can I help make CPR a household staple for every household in Arkansas, and we'll find a place for you. We have a little formalized process. You fill out a form, and we know how to get a hold of you. And for the appropriate things in your area, we'll contact them.
Well, I hope that this episode helps send several your way. I hope specifically Arkansans. So one last question, and we talked a little bit about this, but if you would tell me more about how schools are affected, specifically rural schools, because a lot of Arkansas is small school districts. And is there any kind of way that the American Heart Association can reach those communities with training and education?
There is. Unfortunately, for the 6 states that I'm over in, Arkansas is included, have a mandate for CPR as a graduation requirement, but there's no funding necessarily behind that. So our job, as we've taken it on, is to find funders and foundations that are interested, whether they're individuals or foundations, in really helping students learn CPR all across Arkansas. So we're actively looking for that. And when we do find those, we can provide a kit that has 10 mannequins in it that is really designed for classroom work. And you can do 20 and even stretch into 30, because I know how classrooms are these days. Teach these students all in one class period the fundamentals of hands-only CPR, how to use an AED when the time comes, and some basic first aid as well. So we have those kits available. It's just a matter of finding the money in order to place those in schools. It can also be done by sponsorships. If people are sponsoring Go Red for Women and or Heart Ball or whatever in your area, you can actually designate part of that gift to CPR in schools. So I'd encourage anybody that is doing that, has that ability as administrators in the hospitals and systems there, to, hey, that's an easy part that we can do, and it's a tangible way of seeing how your gift is really working in your community.
Well, that's an excellent way to end in this episode. And I think that the message is very strong and near to all of us, because we all have had someone that's been affected by cardiac arrest in some way in our lives. I know that I have, and your personal story is very, very telling as well. So, Jim, I appreciate the time that you've given me today, and thank you so much. And not only do I hope that this does a lot for not only education, but access to those things as well within all of our viewing area, not just the state of Arkansas. Yeah, so I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Robin.
And that's it for this edition of AFMC TV. I'm Robin Ledbetter. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.